Let's break down a few of the things that might cause people to experience burnout. One of the things we know about usually high achievers, they overcommit, because most people nowadays, especially Americans, we want it fast, we want it now, we want to achieve it, we'll spend, we brag about how we don't get sleep. But how do these high achievers recognize these early warning signs of burnout? Because what we found in the study was just pretty frightening, really. I mean, these are people at the top of their game. And you want to get it before it's too late. So tell us a little bit about that.
Totally. Yeah, that was actually one of the biggest surprises I think that I had working with the researcher Francisco, because the first insight was all of the people that we were having in the study were clinically depressed without having any idea about it. Oh my God, they didn't even know that they're actually pushing themselves to this very unhealthy level.
Welcome to the Brain Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Patrick Porter. Please join us on our mission to better 1 billion brains. Enjoy the episode and remember to share it with your family and friends.
Hello, BrainTap Nation. This is Dr. Patrick Porter. Welcome back to Brain Fitness Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, someone who's a sought-after stress management trainer. And I know none of you listening probably have any stress, so you can just turn the dial right now. You don't have to worry about it. This isn't the place for you, right? So she's also a TEDx speaker. She's going to talk to us a little bit about her experience with TEDx. But most importantly, what I'm so proud of is her peak performance method. When I met with her a number of years ago, we got together, we talked, and we put together a training program on BrainTap where you can actually hear Julia. If you haven't heard her, we're going to be featuring, if this podcast just went live, we're going to be featuring those reels, everything that we do with her in all of her sessions on the front page of the BrainTap app. So go there and you'll see peak performance method. And if you want to accelerate your well-being as well as your business mindset, then you want to tune into those. Now, Julia, thanks for being on the call and being part of BrainTap.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, let's start from the beginning. I mean, here you were. You have nearly a decade of experience at Google. You were corporate leadership. You're doing all these things in neuroscience, mindfulness, and then you get burnout and you start a new business. Tell me a little bit about how all that happened.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do that. And the biggest fun fact about me since last week is I'm officially German American since last week.
All right, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's really exciting because people always ask me about my accent. That's why I usually like to start with that. So I was born and raised in Germany, but as you were already mentioning, I spent almost a decade at Google, both in Europe and in the US. And, it was really interesting because I was always focused on my physical health. I was actually really, kind of consistent with a good workout routine. But over the course of a really busy project during my time at Google, I kind of slipped out of a couple of good routines and habits without really realizing it. To the point where in the summer of 2018, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which was work related. So today we kind of know that was burnout. And that brought me on this really interesting path of self-discovery of how did I even get here? I always thought I'm kind of this healthy and active person. People were looking to me to get advice on how to start their workout routine. And all of a sudden I was faced with this more internal struggle that I couldn't really put a thing on. So that brought me on this self-discovery journey. And in that process, I've built the peak performance method. And it's funny because I was just chatting with somebody the other day about you and about how we started our conversations. And I said, I really remember this actually really clearly because the first time you came onto my podcast was in December 2019. Yeah. And I was telling you, about the peak performance method and about how I really want to help people sustain their performance over time, no matter if they're working at a corporate job or starting and building their own business, because I truly believe that we unfortunately all have kind of learned, especially as high achievers, how to just have a really high pace, but we haven't really learned how to sustain that over time without the burnout. And I was telling you about that, and I said to you, I'm I'm working with the corporate world. I work with Google and with Meta and with Amazon and all these big companies. And the biggest thing, that I really want to bring as a differentiator is I want to show them data, and I want to show them a study of how impactful it is actually to invest in yourself. And that's how, then in 2020, we started to build these BrainTaps based on the peak performance method modules. And the rest is kind of history.
That's great. And we're going to have, we're talking with Julia Arndt, of course, she's the founder of Peak Performance Method. And we're going to put the links below so you can like and follow her. And we have a link there so you can check out her program if you want to. If you're a peak performer, and once you're done with this conversation, you want to go over there and check it out, that's great. We're going to have it. It's at Peak Performance with Julia. And we'll put that in the show notes down below. So don't worry if you're driving, you can come back to this and we'll make sure you get a hold of her. So now tell us a little bit about, because most people nowadays, especially Americans, we want it fast, we want it now, we want to achieve it, we'll spend, we brag about how we don't get sleep. But how do these high achievers recognize these early warning signs of burnout? Because what we found in the study was just pretty frightening, really. I mean, these are people at the top of their game, and you want to get it before it's too late. So tell us a little bit about that.
Totally. Yeah, that was actually one of the biggest surprises I think that I had working with the researcher Francisco, because the first insight was all of the people that we were having in the study were clinically depressed without having any idea about it. And that's kind of what you're referring to, right? Like this frightening insight of, oh my God, they didn't even know that they're actually pushing themselves to this very unhealthy level. And so early warning signs is a really important, piece of information, because our bodies are actually giving us signals, but we have become very good about ignoring them and just kind of suppressing them and avoiding them and not looking at them. What am I talking about, right? It can be both physical or mental symptoms that we are experiencing very high levels of stress and that it's starting to have an effect. So from a physical perspective, it could be anything from, constantly being sick or fatigued, having trouble sleeping, constantly having stomach issues, I was once on a podcast talking about burnout, and we were talking, kind of TMI, but we were talking about digestive issues, having diarrhea on a constant basis, or, for me, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And so I didn't even know what anxiety was until they told me this is what you're actually experiencing. So I did have all the symptoms of anxiety. So just to make it really clear for the listener, it's like I was constantly feeling super nervous. Like I'm just about to speak to 150 people. And I just had this heightened stress and anxiety feeling all the time, which over the course of time is not very healthy, and it doesn't really feel very comfortable to feel like that all the time. So those are the physical symptoms. And then from a mental perspective, those are just some, not an exhaustive list, could be headaches, could be migraines, it could be an eye twitch, it could be super tight shoulders. There's a million symptoms, but pay attention to how you're actually feeling. And then from a mental perspective, it can be very negative thoughts, like feeling on the edge all the time. I actually just had a call with my group that I'm coaching at the moment. And one of them said to me, she's like, I'm working really closely with my sister, and she's kind of reflected to me that I've always been kind of on the edge and just kind of short fused and not a really good people kind of person to be around. And so those are all insights actually for you when you're taking a moment to just pause and see how you're feeling, that are indicating that you might experience very high stress levels.
I know we're not going to open up the whole cupboard and tell them everything about your program, but I'm sure that what happens is they get to learn to take an evaluation, really, what's going on with them, right? I always tell people you can't exchange your life work for your life.
Yes.
You only have so much life energy, and what are you giving it to, right? So how can these high achievers, most doctors, if you're an entrepreneur, unless you just want to struggle, you're going to be a high achiever. You want to get to a point where your airplane's flying without gas, right? Mm-hmm. You're just coasting on the winds and things are happening. How can they avoid this while maintaining the peak performance?
Yeah. One of the most interesting insights I think that I learned in this process and in this journey of self-discovery was that, stress management is great and mindfulness is great, but just by yoga and meditation alone, there are still things that we need to address. So what is actually the root cause of that stress, right? And for my high achievers, with all of the corporate employees and entrepreneurs that I work with, one of the big insights was, well, they're all struggling with time management and like prioritization, because everything in this world seems important, and it's hard to like identify what's actually important, what's not important. How do I prioritize? And then obviously this like expectation of ourselves that even if they don't say that they expect it by in 1 hour from now, I have this expectation on myself, and all of a sudden I'm finding myself just spinning my wheels in overdrive. And so, what I'm teaching is actually a combination of time management, setting boundaries, how to communicate boundaries, because that goes hand in hand with time management. And then obviously also like self-care and like basically habit building and routines. Like how do you replace habits and routines that you're doing at the moment, which we all have habits and routines. The question is just, is it a good routine? Is it healthy for you? Does it actually support your well-being? Or is it something that's actually kind of detrimental to your wealth and health? It's the peak performance method basically teaches how to overcome and avoid burnout by implementing all of these different habits and routines, no matter if it comes to like your personal well-being, but also to your almost like professional well-being. So when you're listening today and you're like, okay, like what can I do? What's the first thing that I can do? Is I would really strongly recommend to you to sit down at the beginning of your workday, and before you open your inbox, I invite you to write down the top 3 priorities that you have for the day. And you might think immediately, I have more than 3 priorities. I have like 15 things on my to-do list since yesterday. Okay, then let's start with that. And then I assume and I know that from these 15 things, you can still build kind of this like prioritization list. So what are the top 1 to 3 things from that list that need to get done today? And then take a look at your calendar and see if that actually is reflected. Do you have time to work on these things, or are you in meetings all day long? So you're already, creating more of this like realistic timeline of, is this actually achievable? And if it is not, right, then like all of these kind of puzzle pieces need to start to shift and mold around in order to actually free up time for yourself, for the most important work that you have, and then obviously all of the other meetings and more maybe incoming requests, in order to manage that, to avoid that you work until midnight every day, sleep 5 hours, get up the next day and kind of do the same thing all over again.
Yeah. So those are some great tips. Do you have any other habits and routines that you can share with the listeners so they can understand? I mean, that's a great one. I mean, obviously, so many people, they make a list of 30 things and then they beat themselves up all night long because they didn't finish them, because nobody could have finished them. A team of 7 people couldn't have finished them, but they still write them all down.
Right. It's funny that you're asking that, right? Because we always want more instead of just taking this one thing and like start to try and implement maybe that one thing. So I always recommend start with one thing. But, my whole kind of motto these days is like prioritize yourself first, especially in this busy world. And that's what my TEDx talk actually is about as well. So I actually did this with that group coaching that I just mentioned this morning. And one of the things that we're looking at is really in detail, what are the routines when you wake up in the morning. So oftentimes what we do, what probably a lot of you listeners that are listening right now can relate to, is you wake up and the first thing you do is you take your phone and you check your messages. You go into your inbox, you maybe already replied to a couple of messages, you check your social media, and before you know it, you feel like you're already late, right? Like you're procrastinating on getting up, on getting the day started, because you're on your phone. So that's like a really big habit that I've seen make a really big difference in high achievers' lives, to really prioritize themselves first, and spend really the first 15 to 30 minutes in the day with mindfulness, like drink a glass of water and hydrate, go outside if you want, right? Or make your bed, read the newspaper, sit down and write down your 3 priorities, but like really just spend your time for yourself for a moment, because for the rest of the day, we all give out our energy to everyone else. So how can you really just nourish yourself first?
Right. That's great. Now, we talk a lot about, and the reason we got together is we wanted to help these guys rewire their brains, right?
Yes.
When they're in the program. So tell us about how the peak performance method helps to rewire the brain.
Yes. Well, and that's where the BrainTap comes in, right? And that's where I've been so excited to partner with you over the last 5 years. And everyone, over the 100 people that have been participating in the program since then have loved the BrainTaps. So, rewiring the process, sorry, let me say this one more time. Rewiring the brain is a process. And it takes, I believe, especially for high achievers, there's this part of like understanding it on a logical level, but then also implementing it more on like this more subconscious level. So what the peak performance method does is we teach people, how to rewire the brain on a conscious level, like what is required to change your habits? Why is it so hard to change habits, right? Because neurologically, especially as a high achiever, we're trying to save time all the time. So we have all these habits and routines that are not always super helpful. So we need to rewire them. And so what we've been able to show with BrainTap actually, and in that study that we've mentioned in 2020, we were able to show that when you are using BrainTap, we basically recorded a BrainTap for each of the modules in the program. And when you accompany that, we saw incredible results for the participants in helping them rewire the brain as well, because it happens more in these like, and I'm sure you're talking about that on the Brain Nation podcast all the time about like these different frequencies of the brain, and how when we're not constantly in this like alpha beta state where we're just kind of like thinking and going to more of this like subtle, okay, what's kind of laying underneath that. So one of the things that I think is really important to talk about, which is something that's part of that, is the mindset and the belief system, and really diving into what is actually the belief that I'm holding that has created this like neurological pathway in my brain that I think, I'm not enough, or I am only successful if I work 90 hours a week, kind of a thinking. Right. So I feel like it does take this like conscious level, and then the subconscious level is kind of the cherry on top.
Sure. Yeah. And I was going to ask the question about, you're talking a little bit about self-awareness, right? And it plays a balance with these high achievers. So tell me about how high achievers create this self-awareness and well-being so that they can start developing it. I mean, people, we're so used to letting other people tell us what to do or how to feel, what to expect. Some people get a little scared when they start doing a little introspection because they've never done that.
Yeah, totally. Self-awareness, super important. When I'm sure you talk about self-awareness too, right, on the Brain Nation podcast. It's like the first step, right? We need to realize that there is something there that we want to change before we can make the change. And the cool thing is that even just by awareness alone, we're actually already starting this like neurological rewiring of the brain. How do you start with awareness, right? Like what can you do? And I think when you're listening right now, you're already doing it. You're listening to a podcast and you are learning new information that makes you reflect on yourself and on your life. And I'm sharing a couple of examples here, right? And you might be like, oh, I'm doing that as well. Maybe that's not so good then, right? Like I also always get up in the morning and I'm on my phone right away, and I actually feel super anxious when I do that. And I start my day feeling frazzled and then I jump into my inbox and I already feel overwhelmed. Well, if that, by learning and by hearing about these things, you're already starting to build awareness, which is really awesome. Other ways to do that is reading books, right? Talking with people, following Instagram accounts, right? Social media is big at the moment. And will be for the foreseeable future, I'm sure. But yeah, I think all of these pieces of information help with this self-reflection and pausing of, am I actually doing that as well? One of the tools that I really love for self-awareness is journaling. And I think that's one of the first things that I actually did and changed when I burned out, was creating a better morning routine and sitting down in the morning journaling my thoughts. And that really helps with self-awareness as well.
That's great. Now, let's break down a few of the things that might cause people to experience burnout. One of the things we know about usually high achievers, they overcommit. You kind of said that at the very beginning. So what are some strategies somebody might use? I mean, by overcommitting, you mean, unfortunately, they call me the yes man around here too. So, somebody probably, the high achievers know that there's a saying actually in the Boy Scouts, I don't know if you ever heard it, it says, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Because they can't not have something completed. They have to, finishers are hard to find, but we overcommit. So what can we do about that?
Great question. I count myself into those people as well, but I think I've learned to set boundaries. I think, again, right, we just talked about awareness. So the first step is to just be aware that, hey, I am actually really saying yes to everybody. And it's actually not really, like, I don't enjoy this anymore. I feel burned out and I'm feeling kind of resentful towards all these other people because they're asking me, because they know I always say yes. And so the awareness is the first step. And then, I'm really big on talking about setting boundaries and like creating this like balance between how can you take care of yourself in order to show up even better. I think there's still, unfortunately, this like belief out there, especially amongst high achievers, that the more I work, the more I get done. And the more I get done, the more valuable I feel and the more rewarded I will be. And so we kind of have to break this like belief of, or this like, I think it's a belief like that only if I am valuable, then I am worthy of love and of praise and all these different things. And so I think there's a little bit of work to be done on that front. And then, when it comes to setting boundaries, then once you have that awareness, you can say, okay, well, what are the priorities on my end, right? Like, how much time do I actually have this week? And then if somebody comes to you with a request and then they ask you, hey, can you do this thing? Then you can kind of check with your priority list and say, well, either it's your manager that comes to you, and then you can talk with your manager and say, I'd love to do and help you with this. Can we take a look at the prioritization list for this week and see how that fits in and what you want me to prioritize first? Because there are just so many hours in the day. Right. I think we've learned as well in the past that we just keep working, right? Especially since the pandemic, everybody's working from home. So there's this like blur of work and home life where you're like, well, I'm constant, my computer is always there and I can always check my emails and I can do this request really quickly and that request really quickly, but we're never really fully disconnected, which is, you tell us, Dr. Patrick Porter, right? Like how detrimental that is to our brain.
Right. No, it's very bad. I love when I changed my philosophy when there was they were interviewing the Maharishi. And he put together these universities and everything, and they said, "How could you get it all done?" He said, "Well, there's 3 rules: do something, get something done; do little, get more done; do nothing, get everything done." And what he meant was, you have to give it to your people. If you're the leader, you have people that can do it. You don't have to handle everything. And I think you kind of talked about that. So. But the other thing people have, like these high achievers, they're perfectionists, right? They can't. I had a friend of mine. His software was used by 93% of all the banks in the world for asset liability management. So I mean, it was really good. I mean, he had a great business, right? And he didn't have to worry about money but he could never make a decision. He was a big procrastinator because he had a perpetual question going in his head that we found out that was, do I have enough information to do it perfectly? That was his mindset. So if he didn't have enough, so he lucked out with the software, because he was a programmer and he got programmers together and they created it. But the reality is that sometimes you have to go to market with an 80% solution and then find out where the bugs are and fix it. Yeah. But in real life, in everyday life for the listeners, what is your attitude about perfectionism and how does that affect burnout?
Yeah, well, you are asking a recovering perfectionist here as well, for sure. I think I can relate to this idea of like, I want to do everything myself because I know I just have like a certain quality that I'm expecting. And one of my goals actually this year in my business is to automate and delegate because it's just, there's just too many things to do. And I think it's a little bit of a practice. Like even I hired a marketing assistant and virtual assistant at the end of last year, and I still catch myself doing things on my own because I'm in my head, I'm like, oh, it's just going to be so much faster. And like, I know exactly how I want it to be done, you know? So again, I think there's like this awareness that needs to come in of like, okay, I'm doing this and it's actually not really helpful. It's burning me out. I just grew a new Instagram account really quickly in like 6 months to 30,000 followers. And that's like a lot of like new inquiries and things to manage. And so, yeah, you can't do it all on your own. So I think it's actually a really valuable skill to learn and to be aware of your perfectionism. And I think, the problem with perfectionism is I think there's an identity, like you're so connected to this identity of I'm a perfectionist, right? There's like a good part about that of like, I'm doing really high quality work and like, I'm really appreciated for that work. But then there's also that flip side of, well, I work until midnight and, I can't sleep because I think about that work for 5 hours. And I just kind of work myself to the ground in the process, and that's not really healthy. So I think perfectionism does lead to burnout in a lot of cases. And it's kind of the same process over and over again, right? It's always like awareness. What is the first action item that you can take in order to alleviate that expectation a little bit, right? And it's sometimes like asking people, it's like, getting a coach that helps you to really identify what is actually required, like how much, right? You were saying he always wanted to deliver 95, 100% instead of maybe 80%. So I think there's also like just getting comfortable in the discomfort for a while in order to shift that. But in my experience, I think you can't fully recover from perfectionism, but I definitely think you can improve it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I keep reminding Cynthia, I said if they could do it like you did it, they wouldn't be working for us. They'd have their own business. They'd be doing it. So, that's what you have to keep everything in perspective, right? Now, I know during our study, one of the things that blew the minds of the participants was just take some time during the day. And we were talking about what happens at 2:00 in the afternoon. We have that biological drop and try to get them to use it. And we found that you had even more productivity, or they produced more results by taking that time off. But people neglect recovery, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about what we found and what you're teaching your participants.
Yes. Yeah. So we tested the peak performance method on a couple of different scales. We looked at stress levels, anxiety and depression, performance mindset, and sleep. And, the peak performance method program is a systematic and proven approach, of course, at this point, right, because of the study that showed when you are actually taking about an hour per week to learn, to invest, and then, the participants also did like the BrainTaps at least 2 to 3 times a week for best results. And we saw incredible results. Like I'm still like, every time I talk with people about what we found, we basically had 20 participants. We split the group up by 10. So when we split the group in 2, we had 10 participants each. One group was just doing basically the conscious program, right? They went through the different modules, they did the different exercises and journaling prompts and started to implement the habits and routines into their lives. And then the other group did the same thing, but they also added BrainTap to their routines for the week. And we saw very good results with both groups, but the ones that did BrainTap had even more significant results. So we saw, and I need to look at the very specific numbers to recall them really quickly, but we had stress levels. So we saw stress levels decrease by up to 45%, depression reduced by up to 71%, which was the biggest mind-blowing number that we saw. Especially also, right, because we identified that everyone was actually clinically depressed without having any idea about it. We saw sleep quality improve by up to 48%, and then performance increased by 26%, and the mindset shifted in a positive direction in about 41% improvement as well. So yeah, it was just really, and for me, honestly, what that shows me is that, and I know that when you invest in yourself, when you take time to pause, and when you start to really prioritize yourself and maybe say no to a couple of inquiries and to a couple of emails, but you will show up better. So when you invest in yourself, there will always be a positive outcome. And the idea is really, when you love what you do, that's great. And at the same time, I know that especially in today's world, right, with AI, where everything is moving so quickly, we just want to make sure that we can sustain that pace. And AI is great in a lot of different ways, but also AI will never be able to take our hand and say, okay, you got to take a break and you need to slow down for a moment. So we are still responsible for that. And that's, I think, is going to be the superpower and the competitive advantage of people that are actually investing in those habits and routines.
Okay. We're talking with Julia Arndt. She's the person who created and has been teaching the peak performance method. We did a study with her. It was great. She's inspired thousands to prioritize well-being while accelerating their careers. So if you found anything interesting, please go below, click on her links to follow her on social media. She's sharing things all the time. You're very busy. It didn't just happen that you got 30,000 people. You're putting a lot of time, energy, and effort into it, and it's showing up. And I think people are finding good value in that. So you should go there and do it. And if you're one of those professionals that's feeling on the verge of burnout, which is probably almost everyone out there right now, because if you're not doing something to manage your stress, it's only piling up, and so we've got to rewire that brain, right? So when we talk about rewiring the brain and your peak performance method, what if I forgot to ask you about today that's like on top of your mind, or what do you want to reinforce for the listeners so that they go and check you out?
Yeah. I think the one thing we haven't really talked about is the TEDx talk.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah, the TEDx was really cool. One of my dreams to stand on the TEDx stage became a reality in September last year in Temecula in Southern California. And the topic of the TEDx talk is your drive to succeed holding you back? And I kind of talk about how at a very young age, when I was 10 years old, I basically developed this like drive to succeed because of praise from my dad and like actually having bad grades in school, to then developing this system of like working hard to become to get better grades and then be like the level graduate in high school and college. And so I would just say, if people are curious to learn a little bit more about my own life and how that translates into what I'm doing today and how I basically built the peak performance method, definitely go on YouTube and just type in Julia Arndt TEDx and take a look at the TEDx talk.
Yeah, we can share the link below. If you provide us the link, we'll share it in the show notes, because I think everybody should watch that. Yeah. And it's always a major accomplishment to take such a complex subject and boil it down to 15 minutes, right? So if you're wondering what it's all about, you can go there and we'll put the link below, and it's well worth 15 minutes of your time to watch it. And she's got some very valuable information. So Julia, what's up? What's new? What's in the future for Julia that everyone needs to know about? Because I'm sure we're going to have you back. We've had you on before on the old podcast. Now you're on the new podcast, but we want to keep up with you and what's happening. So I know you're getting married soon. That's one good thing. But what else is happening in your professional life?
I actually did get married 6 months ago.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I got married. We're building a house right now. So personal life is definitely very busy. And then what I'm really excited about this year is I'm actually in the process of building my first chatbot on the peak performance method. So basically, people want things to be even more accessible, and they don't have the time to like go through like 30-minute modules and learn all of these different things. And so I'm actually super, super excited this year to bring out my first chatbot that is basically taught and educated on all the things peak performance and everything that I've been teaching over the last 6 years, and can provide immediate coaching and input for anyone that's looking to get help. I'm really excited about that. In kind of this age of AI, I think that's a really exciting thing. I think,
and below we'll put links directly. If you're a BrainTap user, we'll put the links directly so you can go to the first of her series, because now in the app we actually have a link where you can put it into you can put it in social media too if you can do it. There's links now from the top of the app that has a arrow pointing up. You can share that on social media or your texting accounts and things like that, and it'll open up directly to your session. so they don't have to wade through 2,000 sessions to try to find you. Although hopefully if you get this podcast when it first is released, because we always feature the podcast host sessions on the app, when they're out there, so people can listen to you and don't have to struggle to wade through 2,000 sessions to find out where you're at. Although if they do put in peak performance, they put in your name, they will show up now. So so if you're a BrainTap user, go there, listen to them, and then hopefully that inspires you to go check out the course. I was able to review the course and go through it. It's excellent. I think it's a very good course, and hopefully we're going to be getting a little preview of that course over on our Integrative Wellbeing Institute, so we can drive more people to you, because so many people don't understand. You need to have conscious commitment to have subconscious action. You can't do something. You can't just meditate your problems away. I wish you could. That'd be easy. I would just create a bunch of sessions and people would never have to get out of bed, but that's not the way it works. You got to make the conscious commitment as well to train the brain. And then now those new neural pathways are formed. We did the sessions that support those, and Julia's actually one of the voices on there. So you get to her with, because I think your emotion in the program makes it work even better, because you're passionate about it and there's some energy there. So I appreciate what you're doing, Julia, and we'll hopefully get this out there in BrainTap Nation. Let's show our support, get on her social media, follow her, especially if you're a business owner, or if you're someone who's a high achiever, or you want to be a high achiever and you want to make sure you don't have to go through the landmines because somebody else already went through the battlefield. You can just walk in their steps and you don't have to worry about stepping on those landmines. So again, thank you for being a guest on the Brain Fitness Podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today, Patrick.
Okay. All right, BrainTap Nation, now it's up to you. Remember, we're on a mission to better 1 billion brains. And because you've listened this far, you know it's your brain we're talking about right now. So congratulations. Let's share this with family, friends, and coworkers who might feel needs it. Or if they don't even need it, they might not know they need it. Just let them listen to it. Find out that their brain is the most powerful resource they have. If they learn to use it, they can manage stress. You can't eliminate stress. I wish there was a magic wand I could wave past everyone out there and no more stress. What we want to do is build capacity, and that's what we're talking about. And those capacities come from systems. So Julia's created a system that allows the brain to create certainty. And that certainty allows you to create change in your life. So check it out. Again, this is Dr. Patrick Porter with the Brain Fitness Podcast. Thanks for joining me. Let's get out there and change the world one brain at a time. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on our mission to better 1 billion brains. Follow at Dr. Patrick Porter on social media for updates, and remember to practice brain fitness every day.